She said it on a Tuesday in October, standing in my kitchen in the gray cardigan she had borrowed 18 months ago and at some point stopped pretending she was going to return. "I would never risk what we have," she said. "You know that, right? I would never ruin this." I was at the counter, making coffee. She was sitting on the counter, the way she had for 3 years, legs dangling, talking at the back of my head. I said I know, and I meant it, and I handed her a mug, and she took it with both hands the way she always did and looked at me over the rim with an expression I was not allowing myself to read too carefully. I did not tell her that I had already, 6 months prior, quietly ruined it myself, just from my side, just internally, just in the part of a friendship that lives in one person, without the other person ever knowing it, has changed shape. I had been in love with her since April. 6 months of knowing something that alters the geometry of every shared room, every ordinary conversation. Every morning she shows up in your kitchen in your cardigan and tells you she would never risk what you have. I said I know, and handed her the mug and filed the conversation under things I will not say. The problem with filing things under things you will not say is that the folder does not stay closed. It just looks closed. From the outside, from the inside, it is under continuous low-grade pressure, which anyone who has ever tried to maintain a file like this will recognize as the dominant texture of the months that follow. Her name was Soleil, and the friendship was the kind that people describe in terms of duration because duration is the most legible measure of the thing, even though it is not the most accurate one. We had known each other for 6 years, since the second week of a job neither of us still had. Bonded over the particular misery of onboarding at a company that described its culture as family-oriented and meant it in the way that families mean it when they want loyalty without accountability. We survived layoffs together. We helped each other move across 2 different cities in 2 different years. We sat in hospital waiting rooms and on moving truck floors and in the parking lots of places we were leaving for the last time. She was the person I called at 11 p.m. when the call could not wait until morning. She knew, without being told, when I needed to be left alone versus when I was saying I needed to be left alone and should in fact be ignored. She had developed, over 3 years, an uncanny ability to gauge my emotional state from whether there were dishes in my sink. Fewer dishes meant I wasn't eating, which I did when I was sad. She once drove 40 minutes in a Tuesday rainstorm because I had texted her I'm fine with a period, which she had identified correctly as a signal that I was not. I knew her equivalently. I knew the register that meant she was performing okay versus actually okay, the slightly higher pitch, the deliberate cadence of someone keeping their voice on a short leash. I knew she processed things by talking first, then needing silence, then needing to talk again, and that interrupting the silence phase was the one way to break the whole sequence. I knew the particular sound she made when she was being brave about something she was afraid of. 6 years of that. 6 years of being fluent in each other. And then, April. The thing I did not say. 6 months of the folder. What happened in April was nothing dramatic. That is the part nobody tells you. There is usually no single scene, no pivotal moment, no event you can point to and say, there, that was it. That was when it changed. What happened in April was a Saturday afternoon, her on my couch reading something for work while I was in the kitchen, and I came in with 2 glasses of water and set one beside her, and she looked up and said thank you in the voice she used when she was distracted by something good, and I stood there for a moment, looking at her in the particular April light of my apartment, and something reorganized itself in my chest without asking my permission. That was it. That was the whole thing. A glass of water and a distracted thank you, and the April light. I went back to the kitchen and stood there for a while, and understood, with the clarity of something that has already happened before you noticed. that I had been in love with her for some amount of time, and April was simply the first moment I stopped not knowing it. The following months had a particular quality, not terrible at all, because the thing underneath was warm and large, and it made the friendship feel even more like what it already was, which was the most important relationship in my daily life. But the folder was also there, which meant that some portion of my attention was always occupied with its management. I became very precise about the difference between how I acted with her and how I felt while acting with her. I became very good at the gap between those two things. I told Damien in June, because Damien had known me long enough that there was no version of this I could sustain in his vicinity without him eventually noticing. He listened and asked 3 questions, and then said, "Are you going to tell her?" I said, "No." He said, "Okay." And then, "That's going to be a long folder." He was correct. It was a long folder. The first crack in the folder came in November, from a direction I had not anticipated: her younger sister. Preeti was 31, lived across town, and had the quality of certain younger siblings in which years of watching the older one have produced an accuracy that the older sibling finds intermittently inconvenient. She and I had always gotten along in the warm but careful way of two people who love the same person and are mutually aware that each knows things about her the other doesn't, which creates a kind of respectful triangulation. We ran into each other at the pharmacy on a Wednesday afternoon. She was picking up a prescription for their mother. I was there for entirely ordinary reasons. She was turning out of an aisle when she saw me, and she stopped, and she had the expression of someone deciding whether to say a thing that has been waiting to be said. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure. Are you in love with my sister?" The aisle was very still. Somewhere overhead a fluorescent bulb was doing the faint hum that fluorescent bulbs do when you need silence. "We're friends," I said. "I know what you are," Preeti said, without unkindness. "That's not what I asked." I looked at the shelf beside me, which contained an array of cold remedies arranged by symptom, none of which were relevant to my situation. "Why are you asking?" "Because she talks about you differently than she talks about everyone else, and she doesn't seem to know it," Preeti said. "And because she called me last week and asked whether I thought it was possible to love a friend in a way that felt different from friendship without it necessarily meaning something, and I told her I thought that was called something, and she told me I was being unhelpful and changed the subject." The hum of the light continued. A person at the far end of the aisle was studying vitamins with total absorption, entirely uninvolved in my situation. "What did you tell her it was called?" I asked. "I told her it was called Obvious," Preeti said, "and there was no cruelty in it, just the frank patience of someone who has been watching a slow-developing situation from outside it. I'm not telling you what to do. I just think the two of you are doing a very committed impression of people who have decided not to know something, and I happen to think that the thing you're not knowing is the same thing." She said goodbye, picked up her basket, and went to pay for her mother's prescription, and I stood in the cold remedy aisle for several additional minutes with the fluorescent hum and the vitamins and the information that Soleil had asked her sister whether it was possible to love a friend differently. I drove home. I sat in my car for 15 minutes in the parking garage of my building. Then I went inside and called Damien, who had known me since we were 22, who had watched me make enough decisions over enough years to have a reliable read of when I was approaching one incorrectly. "I think I need to tell her," I said. "Okay," he said. "I'm not going to," I said. There was a pause. "Okay," he said again, in a different register entirely. "The friendship is, I know," he said. "You've explained the friendship multiple times. But I want to say something, and I want you to actually hear it rather than file it. A beat. The friendship you're trying to protect doesn't currently exist in the form you're protecting it. You changed it in April. The version of it you're living in right now is already not the original thing. So the question isn't whether to change it. You've already done that. From your side, unilaterally. The question is whether she gets to know that, and whether she gets a say in what comes next. I sat with that. Whether she gets a say. She said she'd never risk the friendship. I said. She said that. Damien said, before she called her sister to ask whether loving someone differently is the same as loving them. December arrived in the way it always did between us, absorbed into a loose itinerary of each other's traditions that had, over 6 years, become something entirely its own. The 23rd at her mother's house. The 26th at mine, working through a stack of films neither of us had seen, but both had been meaning to. Her feet on my couch cushions. 2 separate blankets. The room doing its December thing, where the outside is cold and the inside is warm, and neither of you has anywhere to be. Halfway through the second film, she said, without moving, without looking away from the screen, Preeti told me she ran into you. She did. She said you looked like you were thinking very hard about something. I think hard in pharmacies. It's the lighting. She turned to look at me then. The particular angle of her head that meant she was deciding whether to pursue something. What were you thinking about? I considered several available answers and landed on nothing I was ready to say yet. She held the look for a moment. Then she turned back to the screen. But she didn't fully settle. Her body retained a certain alertness, the held quality of someone who has registered that there is something in the room and is deciding whether to name it. I watched the film and was aware of that orientation the way you are aware of weather changing. We did not say anything else about it that night. But the quality of the silence that followed had changed slightly from the easy kind to the held kind. The kind where something is present in the room that hasn't been named, and naming it would take more than either of us was prepared to do at that particular moment in December on the couch, with 2 separate blankets, and a film neither of us were fully watching anymore. She left at 11. I walked her to the door. She put her coat on in the doorway and said, "I've been thinking a lot lately about things I might be organized around incorrectly." Organized around incorrectly, I repeated. Like the way you can be very structured about something and the structure makes sense from the inside, but someone looking at it from outside can see the thing it's built to avoid. I looked at her in the doorway in December. Have you figured out what the thing is? Working on it, she said. And then she hugged me, the way she always did at doorways, and left. I stood in the closed door for a moment. Then I texted Damien. I think she's working on the same file. He wrote back after 2 minutes. Do you want me to say I told you? I wrote no. He wrote, noted. Let me know what happens. What happened was a week of ordinary things. Texts about work. A shared playlist she'd been building that suddenly had a different quality when I listened to it. A Tuesday where she called just to talk, and the call went 2 hours on nothing in particular, and everything in particular. The way our calls had always gone, except that I was now paying attention to something I had been carefully not paying attention to for months, and the attention changed the texture of everything. What happened was that on January 3rd, at midnight, my phone lit up. 3 days into the new year, she texted at midnight. Can I come over? I know it's late. I'm fine. I just need to think out loud somewhere that isn't my apartment. I wrote back. Doors unlocked. She arrived in 12 minutes. She was still in her coat when she came in, which meant she'd been sitting in the car outside for some portion of that 12 minutes. I clocked this without commenting on it. She sat in the armchair across from the couch instead of on the couch, which was also unusual. The couch was her default, had been for 3 years. And the chair meant she was there to say something and had instinctively created a little more formal space around the saying of it. I waited. "I've been trying to figure something out," she said. "Okay, and the way I've been trying to figure it out is by not figuring it out, which is a pattern I have." "I know the pattern," I said. "I know you do." She looked at her hands for a moment. "I said something to you in October. In your kitchen. Yes, I said I would never risk what we have. I would never ruin the friendship." "I remember. I said it," she said, "because I was scared of what I would say if I didn't say that. Does that make sense?" "It makes sense. I said it as a closing argument, for a case I was making to myself, about why I wasn't going to say the other thing." "What other thing?" I asked. And I asked it even though I had a very strong working hypothesis, because she had driven here at midnight and sat in the chair and was being brave in the register. I recognized the slightly higher pitch, the deliberate pacing, and she deserved to say the actual words in her actual voice rather than have me assemble them for her. She looked at me steadily. "That I think I already did. Ruined it. From my side. Without asking. Without." She stopped. "Without you knowing." The room was quiet. A car passed slowly outside, and then it was just the room. "Since when?" I asked. She looked down at her hands again. When she looked back up, there was a quality in her face that I recognized as the thing that comes after you have been brave about something, the slight release of having said the true thing, and the uncertainty of what the true thing does now that it is in the room. "April," she said. "April. The same April. The same month." I started laughing. Not the polite kind, not the nervous kind, the kind that comes from the body before the mind has processed what is happening, the kind that arrives when absurdity and relief coincide so exactly that there is no other available response. She stared at me. "Why are you laughing?" "Because," I said, "when I could, it's been April for me too." She went still. Not the braced kind of still, but the recalibrating kind. "What?" "The same April. The same 6 months. I have been keeping the same information in the same direction, in a file I thought was very well managed, which I am now understanding was not as opaque as I believed." "You, since April." Yes, she put her face in her hands, not from distress, I could tell the difference by then, 6 years in, but from the specific overwhelm of receiving information you have wanted long enough that receiving it has a vertiginous quality. "We're ridiculous," she said, from inside her hands. Profoundly, she looked up. "In October. In the kitchen. When I said I would never ruin it, you had no idea I'd been carrying it for 6 months. And I was carrying it too, and I did not correct the framing. Because? Because you seemed very certain, I said, and I had decided that the certain version of you was telling me something true. I was telling you what I was afraid of, she said. Not what was true. I know that now. Preeti knew, she said. Preeti was extremely direct with me in a fluorescent lit aisle. What did she say exactly? She said the two of us were doing a committed impression of people who had decided not to know something, and that the thing we were not knowing was the same thing. She called me after and said almost the same thing. Soleil looked at me with the expression of someone processing several things at once. She also said, and this is the part that annoyed me, that I would not have believed her if she'd told me directly, and that was why she didn't. Was she right? A pause. Yes, she said. Probably I was very committed to the file. We both were. 6 months is a long time to be committed to a file. It is, I said. It is also, I want to note, the exact same 6 months. The same file. In the same direction. She laughed again, and this time it was the full kind. The one that doesn't manage itself, and then she was quiet for a moment, and looked at me from the chair with an expression that had moved all the way through the several stages of processing, and landed on something clear and settled. "What do we do now?" she said. "I would start," I said, "by moving to the couch." She stood up from the chair. She crossed the room. She sat next to me on the couch, not at the other end, not at the maximum appropriate distance, but actually next to me in the way that acknowledged what had been said, without requiring anything else to be said about it right now. She still had her coat on. We sat for a while without talking, which was something we did, and which felt different now in the way that all the same things were feeling different. The room was warm. Outside was cold, and January. She had driven over at midnight, and the midnight was now closer to 1. "I keep thinking about October," she said, eventually. "The kitchen." "Yes," I said it, and then I watched your face and thought, I can't tell. And then I told myself I couldn't tell because there was nothing to tell. What did my face do? It did nothing. Which could mean anything. I was doing the thing, I said. The management thing. You were very good at it. Thank you. It cost a lot. She made a small sound that was almost a laugh. I know. I was doing it too. We were both performing the friendship at each other, while the actual thing was right there. Yes. She pulled the coat off after a while and folded it over the armrest, which is the motion of someone who has decided she is not going anywhere. And we talked until almost 3 in the morning about things that had been in the file and things that hadn't needed to be filed. And all the small accumulated moments from April onward that looked different in retrospect than they had in real time. The Saturday afternoon with the glass of water. The October kitchen. The lift ride in November after a dinner where we'd both stayed too late because neither of us was ready for the evening to end, and the ride home where we'd sat in traffic with our shoulders almost touching, and she'd fallen asleep for the last 3 blocks, and I hadn't moved. I didn't fall asleep, she said. You were completely asleep. I was resting my eyes. You were asleep in a lift, and I spent the last 8 minutes of that ride trying not to move. She looked at me sidelong. Why not? Because you were comfortable, I said, and I didn't want to be the reason you weren't. She was quiet for a moment. That's the whole thing, isn't it? She said. Not a question exactly, more like recognizing something. What is? That's been the whole thing, the whole 6 months. Both of us being so careful not to be the reason the other person was uncomfortable that we were, making ourselves smaller, taking up less space than we actually had. Yes, I said. That's the whole thing. She pulled the gray cardigan tighter around her. My cardigan, her cardigan. The cardigan that had made a decision about where it lived long before either of us had, and looked at me with the expression she used when something had become clear. We should have said something in May, she said, in retrospect. You should have said something in May. You also should have said something in May. We both, she said, should have said something in May. Yes, I said, we should have. But it's January, and we said it. And the file is closed. The file is closed, she agreed. We stayed until almost 4 in the morning, at which point it was no longer practical for her to drive, which she acknowledged with the air of someone who had been hoping the logistics would resolve themselves this way, and I got the extra blanket from the hall closet, and we figured out what to do now, which turned out to be significantly less complicated than either of us had spent 6 months believing it would be. There is a particular architecture to the sentence, I would never ruin our friendship. It sounds like a gift. It is designed to sound like a gift, like restraint in the service of something precious, like caution as a form of love, like the choosing of the friendship over the thing that might endanger it. and sometimes it is. Sometimes that restraint is the right answer, the generous answer, and the friendship is genuinely better served by keeping the file closed. But sometimes the sentence is a door, and both people are on the same side of it, and neither of them knows it yet, because they are each holding it shut separately, having independently concluded that they are the only one with their hand on it. Soleil said it in October because she was afraid of what would come out of her mouth if she didn't say it first. She was making a closing argument to herself, she'd told me. A brief in favor of keeping the file closed, delivered out loud, which is something people do when they are less convinced than they're trying to appear. I heard it and added it to 6 months of evidence that I had correctly assessed the situation and the file should stay where it was. The sentence she meant as a declaration I received as a verdict. We were both using the same words to run the same avoidance, and neither of us could see it because we were inside it. We were both in that kitchen, in that ordinary Tuesday morning, protecting the friendship from the thing the friendship had already become. Not by our decision, not by any design, just by the way that 6 years of being known by someone accumulates into something that one day reorganizes in your chest without asking, and then you are standing in your kitchen holding a glass of water and the world has a different shape, and you spend the next 6 months being very careful about a thing that has already decided what it is. That is the thing about the sentence in the wrong tense. I would never ruin our friendship is protective language deployed over a ruin that has already quietly happened. Not a ruin in the catastrophic sense, in the transformed sense, the irreversible, but good sense, the sense in which certain things are permanently changed, and that change turns out to be the best version of them. The original thing was already gone. What we were guarding, in the kitchen and in all the months before it, was not the friendship as it had been. It was a performance of the friendship, delivered to each other with considerable skill and commitment, while underneath it the actual thing was something larger and more precarious, and neither of us had named. What the managing costs you is not the thing itself. The thing is still there, still present, still real. It built itself in the available space regardless of what you were calling it. What the managing costs you is the fraction of yourself that has to stay offline to run it. The part of every conversation occupied with maintenance rather than presence. The way you are never quite entirely in the room because some portion of you is always managing the gap between what you feel and what you're performing. 6 months of that. A year if you're particularly committed to the folder. Preeti saw it from the outside because she was not inside the file. She had been watching Soleil talk about me for long enough to hear the difference between how her sister talked about everyone else and how she talked about me. And the difference was legible from the outside, even when it was invisible from the inside. She asked Soleil the direct question, "Is it possible to love a friend in a way that feels different?" And when Soleil said she didn't know, Preeti heard the answer in the not knowing. She said to me in the pharmacy, "You are both doing a committed impression of people who have decided not to know something." This was the most accurate sentence anyone had said in the vicinity of the situation in 6 months. Damien saw it because he had known me since I was 22 and had watched me explain the same file from every available angle over the course of several months and understood, in the way old friends do, that the explaining was not analysis, but avoidance, and that the question I was actually not asking myself was not should I say it, but does she get to know what has already changed? And does she get a say in what comes next? She deserved a say. She drove over at midnight in her coat and sat in the chair, which is the spatial equivalent of I am going to be brave about this even though being brave about this is the most frightening option currently available, and she said it. And she had, in April, already ruined the friendship, the same way I had, the same month, on parallel tracks that neither of us knew were parallel, and the ruining was the best thing either of us had ever accidentally done to the other. Because what came after the file was not the managed version of what we'd had. It was the thing underneath the management, which was larger and warmer and considerably more than what we'd been so carefully protecting. She still takes the cardigan. It has been, for some time now, more accurately mine in the sense of its location than mine in the sense of its wearer, and I think we both understood that about it long before we understood anything else. Some things are arrangements before anyone officially arranges them. Preeti texted me once, 2 months after the midnight conversation, with no context, I told you. I sent back a single thumbs up. She replied with a small image of a fluorescent light bulb. I sent back a cold remedy emoji. She replied, exactly. This constituted, as far as I was concerned, a full resolution of the pharmacy aisle. On the 6-month anniversary of the midnight conversation, not that either of us had marked the date, it came up incidentally in the middle of a disagreement about what to watch. Because we were now in the kind of relationship where the disagreements about what to watch were a normal feature, rather than a reason to be careful. Soleil mentioned she'd gotten the full version of what Preeti had said to me at the pharmacy. She told you everything? I asked. She told me she told you we were doing a committed impression of people who had decided not to know something. That's accurate. I called her and said she could have said the same thing to me directly. What did she say? Soleil looked at me with the expression of someone reporting a piece of information that is objectively both annoying and correct. She said I wouldn't have believed her. Would you have? A long pause. The honest kind. No, she said finally. Probably not. I was very well organized inside that file. I had a whole system. I know, I said. I had one too. They were, she said, apparently the same file, organized in the same direction, for the same 6 months. Yes, she shook her head, in the way she shook her head when something was absurd in a way she had made peace with. Then she pulled the cardigan tighter around her and turned back to the television and said, "Next time, say something in May." I said, "Next time, so will you." She said, "Deal." Have you ever held back something true to protect a friendship, and then found out the other person was holding back the same thing, for the same reasons, in the same direction, for the same amount of time? And has someone ever said something to you from outside the situation, plainly, without drama, in a pharmacy or a parking lot or a text you didn't ask for, that turned out to be the most accurate thing anyone had said to you in months? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. If this found the right person at the right moment, subscribe. There are more of them.